Hello race fans, Keith Collentine here. Could Silverstone host a second Formula 1 race this year, but running in the opposite direction? Circuit boss Stuart Pringle suggested earlier this week a reverse race might be possible if F1's owners need to hold extra rounds due to the disruption to the calendar caused by the pandemic. But there are practical problems they'd have to solve. To explain what these are, let's take a backwards lap of Silverstone in F1 2019. Now, my F1 2019 skills aren't up to much, as you'll see, and I'm not a track designer either, although I did speak to one who pointed out some of the potential shortcomings that we're going to discuss in this video, and we're going to start off with one of the most important ones. Over there you can see, as rendered in F1 2019, an ambulance, which in a real-world race would have a free run to come onto the circuit. Those two concrete blocks that you're looking at wouldn't be there. That's an access path, which is obviously there for marshals and so on to come out onto the circuit in the event of an emergency. Now, there are access paths like this dotted all around circuits, and they're all orientated in such a way that they aren't going to present a safety concern when cars are travelling the normal way around the track. But of course, you start sending the cars the other way around the track, and each one of those gaps becomes a point at which an out-of-control car could potentially go into areas where we have marshals and spectators and so on. So in order to hold a reverse race, they would have to somehow reconfigure those barriers, not only to make it safer, but also to add alternative access points for marshals at all the different spots around the circuit, and as we'll see, there's quite a few of them. Let's move on from there then and take a look at the rest of the reverse Silverstone layout and see what other potential safety or practical problems there could be. Of course, Club becomes the first corner instead of the last, and the drivers would approach it at quite considerable speeds. At quite a few points around the circuit, we're going to be looking at the runoff areas and asking whether there is quite enough runoff for the cars to go the other way around the track. We swing into the tight right-hander now at Vale, and of course what was the pit lane entrance has now become the pit lane exit. And wherever you've got a pit lane exit on a racing circuit, it's important that the cars are fed back onto the track away from the racing line without too much of a speed differential. This could be a little bit of a problem here, but in a real-world scenario, they could probably paint a few lines, add a few areas that drivers aren't allowed to cross over, and probably manage that from a safe point of view. We go up into Stowe, big fast left-hander obviously, and here again we can see the configuration of the runoff is really done in such a way to enable cars to run the other way around the track. We go this way around, and suddenly at the fast exit point of the circuit there's not as much runoff there, and there's also a big gravel trap on the right hand side where you would probably expect to find an asphalt runoff on a modern high-speed circuit layout. We carry on up the hanger straight and we see more examples of, particularly here on the left hand side, points where the barrier configuration is not ideal. Again, it's not so much that the barrier becomes close to the track there, it's the way in which it's angled, which is not really optimal at all. If you had a car going off there that made contact with the barrier, they'd have a really quite severe impact, and I think in order to properly race cars around Silverstone in the reverse direction, they'd have to look at moving a few of those barriers. Of course, all these things are possible, but they all take time and money and effort that we may not have. Through the superfast sequence at Maggots and Beckett's in reverse, there's quite a lot of runoff there, although not so much on the right as you come through it. And then we come up towards Copse. Now, of course, one of the other unusual aspects about Silverstone is that we have two start and finish areas, and that means two sets of pits. And so one of the pit lane exits, and this one here at Copse is the first one we come to, would also have to be made safe. Now, again, for the benefit of F1 2019 players, this is blocked off. Codemasters have put what look like these massive Lego bricks in the way here. In the real world, where we have that exposed barrier on the left, that would need to be made safe. And the same goes for the drivers as they swing into what would still be a very, very quick left-hander at Copse. The barrier on the left comes in very quickly. There's not a great deal of runoff on the right-hand side either, and that really would be a little bit of a pinch point, I think, as far as safety is concerned. Accelerating on up through Woodcut, drivers would arrive at Luffield at considerably higher speeds. Again, maybe not quite as much runoff there as there would need to be. From there we come out of Luffield into the right-hander at Brooklands and onto the Wellington Straight and into the part of the track which was reconfigured around about 10 years ago. We now have a super quick right-hander as we come into the loop, and then followed by a sharp right-hander. Again, not too bad really from a runoff point of view here. on this slower part of the track, but then again we'll build up speed as we go down through Farm and Abbey back towards the start-finish area. And of course, what was the pit lane exit has now become a pit lane entrance, and again a similar situation to what we have at Copse. These virtual marshals there, their real-life counterparts, will need a bit more protection behind that barrier. And just like we observed at Copse, the barrier is also quite close for what then becomes the midpoint of the corner, where cars would be taking that apex at really quite high speeds. So, as I think we've seen, running Silverstone in a reverse direction isn't just a question of painting the grid hatchings at the start-finish area the other way around and off we go. It would create some fairly complicated infrastructure problems that they'd have to solve. So does it mean that it's a completely unrealistic idea? Well, no, because obviously every problem has its solution, but this does show what kind of commitment would be necessary and perhaps give a hint to the kind of cost that it would involve. If F1 has to hold another race at Silverstone, it could just hold a second race on the same Grand Prix layout. Alternatively, Silverstone does have two shorter configurations that F1 could potentially use at a pinch. It might require a bit of a dispensation in the regulations, but it would be an awful lot more straightforward than making some of the changes that we've just talked about. And so, while the super-fast Silverstone track is just as much fun to drive backwards as it is forwards, I suspect we'll probably only get to experience it in the games. Thanks very much for watching. For more Formula 1 news and analysis, follow @racefans.net on Twitter and Facebook. And make sure you hit subscribe now so you don't miss out on our next new video.